Every player has a skill ceiling and a skill floor. For anybody that's unfamiliar with those terms, skill ceiling refers to the highest level of play, and skill floor is the player's lowest level of play. Playing at their best is what most people get excited about in League. Think of Peak Faker in Season 3. He was doing all kinds of amazing plays while dominating his opponents.
Even though I only have a mat on the floor, I think he's in the bed. Oh, Faker maybe in trouble here. Deathmark tries to clean it up for Ryu. Oh, look at the cleanse, look at the moves! Faker, what was that?
On the other hand, most people don't get excited when they play at their worst.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
They may find it funny if they're playing with their friends while drunk and it's particularly bad. Think of Ultimate Bravery. But in most cases, people don't like it. When you first start playing League, your skill floor is pretty much the same as your skill ceiling. But as you progress, the difference between the two is going to continue to get larger. Excluding the outlier cases, the majority of games do not occur at a player's skill floor nor their skill ceiling. They occur somewhere in between. You also have to consider their level of consistency. Gameplay consistency ranges on a spectrum. Imagine that you scored every one of your games on a scale of 1 to 100. The scale is based on your current skill level, 1 being the worst game that you've played all year, and 100 being the best. Think about how often you have games around 50 compared to games that are closer to the edges at 1 or 100. Some players' games look like this on a graph, and others may look more like this. Either way, whichever side you lean more towards is typically the one you want to focus on. However, it can also depend on how drastic your extremes are. It's usually a good sign if most of your games are in the higher section of the scale, but that changes if the remaining games are all very low to the point that you're almost guaranteed to lose those games. Now that you're familiar with the concepts, it's time to talk about how you can diagnose what's primarily causing your problems. Similarly to taking online autism tests, this diagnosis isn't guaranteed to be 100% accurate, but it's fun to do, and it's a decent way to get you started asking yourself important questions. Do you ever get tilted while playing? How frequently does it occur, and at what intensity? The occasional tilt isn't that big of a deal and is understandable, as long as the tilt remains relatively under control. If you're the type to pop off a lot when you're mentally feeling great, but you're also the type to low-key int games when you're tilted, your skill floor is probably your primary weakness. Do you often find yourself completely mechanically misexecuting in fights? Again, that is a scenario where you should be working on your skill floor. You need to clean those kind of mistakes up. Really try to figure out what's going wrong. Is it that you feel rushed during the fights, or that you're using your abilities in the wrong order? Are you aiming for the wrong target? However, if you're playing most of your fights to a consistently decent level, but you understand that you could push it a little bit more, that's an opportunity to focus on your skill ceiling. How often do you sit there baffled at how you did something so stupid during your last game, or even maybe during the game? If it's not obvious by now, that's the time to work on your skill floor. If you're in a situation where you think you played it really well, and you still lost, that's a likely sign that you should work on your skill ceiling. You need to get more knowledge, a deeper understanding beyond what you already have in that kind of scenario. Hopefully by now, you figured out whether you want to focus on your skill floor or skill ceiling for the time being. Before I get into how to improve each of those, I'm going to talk a little bit about what causes inconsistent gameplay. As I mentioned before, tilt can play a huge part. That's not the only thing though. It can also stem from external distractions, lack of sleep, tunnel visioning in game, or having confidence levels that go up and down too much depending on how you're feeling on that particular day, especially if it's based on whether you're on a win streak or not. If possible, try to remove anything that could mess with your ability to focus on the game before queuing up. This will go a long way for both your skill floor and your skill ceiling. Starting off with improving your skill floor, reviewing your own games is great for this. It will help you see the really obvious mistakes that you're making in your games so you can start to clean those up. Look to replace any bad habits with new ones. It's really hard to outright remove a habit without replacing it. You end up doing it over and over again anyway because that's what you do subconsciously. Imagine that you want to get rid of an IRL habit, such as fidgeting with your hair or saying like as a filler word way too much in your sentences. You have to remember that like when you're playing League, your attention is almost always going to be directed towards like multiple things at once. It may seem simple to do when you're able to put your undivided attention on stopping the habit, but it's completely different as soon as your opponent starts to try to take a trade with you or you need to look at the minimap. So, for example, if you want to get rid of the habit of greeting for risky plates after you crash a wave, try to replace that habit with looking at the minimap while you're crashing the wave to determine if the jungler, or someone else, could potentially show up. If you have a habit of dying trying to steal objectives when it's very unrealistic that you can win the fight anyway, replace that with looking for opportunities to get something else done on the other side of the map, such as a dive. Or at least get some waves pushed so you can look for a turn later. If your focus is to work on your skill ceiling, then you'll get a lot of value from watching better players as well as getting coaching or at least external feedback from a friend. You want to be looking for what other people do differently from you. Try to figure out why they make the decisions that they do and come to understand the value in changing some of your ideologies about the game. It needs to make sense to you. Copying initially, especially if you're new to the game, is okay, but it only goes so far. Until you truly understand the concept, it's hard to apply it in the correct situations properly, nor is it going to affect your subconscious. You also should look to optimize things that you've gotten complacent with in the past. Examples of this are matchup understandings and getting farm efficiently. This applies to both jungle and lane. If you play a mechanically demanding champion with complex combos, spending some time in the practice tool could help as well. Back to what I said before about watching others, focus on perfecting the combos that you're going to get the most value from. Your bread and butter combos that you use almost every single game. Try not to spend too much time being fascinated by montages because they can cause you to look for combos that aren't necessary in order to achieve your goals. Do not get me started on the Chinese TikToks. Regardless of what you choose to focus on first, remember that you don't stick to one forever. Both have to get better in order for you to improve as a player overall. With a high skill ceiling and low skill floor, you look like Hashinshin. And with a high skill floor and low skill ceiling, you're a consistently mediocre player, which isn't a great feeling either.